it's week 20 of season 7 of the Andy Griffith Show. This week's episode title is Andy's Old Girlfriend. Howard comes by the courthouse to tell Andy that an old friend of Andy's named Alice Harter is back in town and that she's looking for him. Andy hasn't seen her in 10 years. And then Gooder comes in to say the same thing. And he kids Andy on how sweet on each other they both used to be. And he asks Andy whether Alice's being in town is going to create a problem between Andy and Helen. And Andy says no. And Gooder says he's not so sure. So Andy goes home and finds Alice already there. She had stopped by to say hi to Aunt Bee. And she says she's coming back to Mayberry to live. And Old Dee tells Andy that before Aunt Dee had to leave and Andy came in, she had told Alice that Alice is going to stay with the Taylors till her house is ready. And she's not going to stay at the hotel. So Andy goes down to the hotel and gets her bags and brings them back. And he tells Alice she can stay as long as she likes. And they sit in the living room, and she takes hold of his hand, and they start reminiscing about the times they had together. The county fair, and the time they got stuck up real high on the Ferris wheel. And then Helen walks in with a muffin pan that she had borrowed from Aunt Bee. And Andy introduces Alice as an old friend, but introduces Helen only as Opie's school teacher. And we can see that Helen's not happy about that. Yeah, she finds out that Alice is staying with the Taylors and is going to live in Mayberry again. And Andy refers to Alice 2 more times as an old friend, but never does refer to Helen as his current girlfriend. So she gets mad and hands Andy the muffin pan real forcefully and tells him to return it to Aunt Dee, and she leaves. So Andy goes to Helen's house to try to make up, and she's still mad, but he gets her to agree to a double date with Howard as Alice's date, so Andy can show her that there's nothing going on between him and Alice. And at Morelli's restaurant that night, Howard and Alice had a good time dancing together. And Andy and Helen say to each other that they hope that Howard and Alice start to be a steady couple. And then Alice suggests that they all go spend the weekend at a cabin by the lake that her family still owns. And they all say that's a great idea. And they agree to leave at noon tomorrow. And at the cabin, they sing while Andy plays guitar and Howard plays drum. And then they go to bed, 'cause they need a good night's sleep before they climb Chimney Rock tomorrow. The boys are going to share one bedroom and the girls another. And Andy and Helen kiss goodnight, and then Alice gives Howard a little kiss too. And during the night, Howard snores real badly, so Andy can't sleep, and he goes outside for a walk. And then Alice comes outside too. She says she couldn't sleep either. And after a while of walking around, Andy says they better go inside and get some sleep. And Alice kids him about being scared of Helen catching them together. And then they're not even sure of which way it is back to the cabin. And Andy says, let's go the way I came from. And meanwhile, Howard wakes up and finds Andy gone from the bedroom, and Helen wakes up and finds Alice gone. And they both go out in the living room, and Howard says, well, they must have each gone for a walk on their own. So they agreed to each go back to bed, but we can see that neither of them is quite convinced of the out their separate walks explanation. Meanwhile, Alice and Andy are lost, and they can't find where the cabin is. And it's 4:30 in the morning. Back at the cabin, Helen can't get back to sleep. She's real upset. But finally, they get back at 6:30, and Howard is back asleep, and Helen just acts like she's asleep. And Andy wants to get their story straight about where they were when Howard and Helen wake up and find them not there. He's concerned, but Alice thinks it's funny. So their story is going to be that they were both up early, and they both woke up early and wanted to surprise Howard and Helen by having breakfast ready for him. They didn't think they need an explanation about being gone earlier in the night. Of course, Helen don't believe it when she wakes up and hears it, and she goes back to her room. And Howard comes out, and he says he don't believe it either. And then he takes Andy back to their room and says, I woke up and saw you were gone most of the night. So Andy tells him the truth and says nothing happened between us. And Howard says, yeah, sure. Plus, Helen knows you are gone too. And then Helen storms out to the car, and she wants Howard to drive her back to town. And Andy goes to the car and tries to explain about the two of them getting lost last night, but she stays mad, and she leaves the car, and she rushes out into the woods. And she gets lost in the woods before Andy can find her again. And then Andy uses that as evidence of the fact that, see, it is easy to get lost in these woods. So that gives credibility to his story about what happened that night. So she believes him now, and they all go back to town. And later, Andy is telling Goulder in the courthouse that they had a good trip, and that there were no problems with the two women, like Goulder said there might be. We'll see you next week for episode 21.